Hari Om. We start with the prayer. Om Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Sadgurum Brahma Vidvaram Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanura Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vidya Dravidam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Gurudeva Deva. There you go. So we are now analyzing the subtle body, because the whole Anatma involves, in the first part of the whole series, is analyzing the three bodies and looking at the fourth. Essentially, I am not any of these three bodies: Sthula Sariram, Sukshma Sariram and Karana Sariram, the causal body. So I am none of them. So in order to none of them, to find out what is actually, so providing an objective analysis of each body. So we're looking now, after completing the Sthula Sariram, the gross body, and now we're analyzing the subtle body. In the subtle body, there are several components involved. The first component was analyzed is the 10 indriyas, that is 5 jnanendriyas and 5 karmendriyas, organs of knowledge and organs of action. And next we takes about the antakarana, then we'll talk about the pancha pranas. And this is how the Viveka text is analyzing. And therefore now antakaranam means inner instruments of the subtle body, part of the subtle body, and that consists of thought process. This is extremely subtle, and therefore this involves a subtle, which is essentially the four aspects of antakarana being discussed. They are of the same type, but depending upon the function, you are making into four different categories. So one is called the buddhi. Buddhi is the intellect, and the second one is the mind, which is manas. So buddhi, manas, these are Sanskrit words. Buddhi, intellect; mind, the what you call manas is mind, but here talking about mind is the emotional center. Even the whole four is again called mind as a package, but here when we say different from buddhi, we are talking about the manas, which is essentially the emotional center. And then the next one is the ego, ahankara, and the fourth one is the memory, chitta. So essentially in the sloka 95 of the Viveka Chudamani, those who have a text, then go back into it or study along with it. Essentially, nigadyate antah karanam manodihi aham krutis chittam etis pravruttibhihi manas sankalpa vikalpanadibihi buddhi padartha vyavasaya dharmata atrabhimana ahamityaham krutihi parthanusandena gunena chittam. So artha anusandhane gunena chittam. So here essentially he is classifying in that sloka the four aspects of the antakarana. Nigadyati antakaranam. So no, these are the antakaranam, and it consists of four parts, and that essentially mano, dhihi, ahankruti, chittam. Essentially list of it is manasu, the mind, emotional; dhi, the intellect; and aham kruti is the ahankara, that means ego; and chittam is essentially the memory. So chit is different from chittam. Chittam is memory, and that is the essentially a thought memory is stored in the like a software. The subtle body is like the thought process is like a software compared to hardware. So brain is not manas. We are talking about this subtle aspect of it, functionality of aspect of it, and that's what we are talking about. In the case of what is mind, what is the intellect, and what is ahankara, and what is chittam, also being analyzed. And all these four together are also sometimes referred as manas. So when you talk about the mind, mind includes all these four, but four we are differentiating depending upon the individual functions. So in the hierarchy of the four, the intellect is buddhi is the highest. Highest is buddhi, like an officer of the whole system. So buddhi, intellect, has to decide what to do, what not to do, and all that. Therefore, the discriminative faculty is buddhi. So, nischayatmikam, yes, this is it. This is the way I am going to do. This is what I want to do. So, all that nischayam means determination involves in the buddhi. Discrimination is what is right and what is right. When there are two things, what is eternal and what is ephemeral, that is the highest buddhi. That is called viveka in the scriptures here. Viveka is any discrimination, but we are talking about subtlest discrimination, which will be later defined. So this buddhi has a capacity to discriminate, provided it is trained. So buddhi also has to be trained. Just as for me to learn chemistry, my buddhi has to gain knowledge by training process. Essentially, learning process has to be there for buddhi. Buddhi can go from the known to the unknown. That is the capacity of the buddhi. From what I know, and I can sweep into unknown and get known. That's how a new knowledge takes place, which I don't know before, by a process of learning, and that's also capacity of the buddhi only. So all that is essentially functionality of the buddhi. So I need the buddhi even for the knowledge of Vedanta knowledge. So it's not the emotional aspect, but here to gain what exactly the truth that is being pointed out by the Vedanta, I need to have the buddhi also. So that is the subtlest antahkaranam. And in the Atma Bodha, Shankara says Sada sarvagatopyatmana sarvatra vabhasate buddhya veva bhaseta swacheshu pratibimbavatu. So even though the Satchidananda is all pervading everywhere, it is the buddhi that's where it shines, because the buddhi has a capacity to reflect the consciousness. We'll analyze a little bit what exactly reflected consciousness versus the original consciousness. Because all that is involved in the analysis of what is subtle body and what is the sakshi also, what is the soul also. This also will be involved. So buddhi is the discriminative faculty. Then comes in the hierarchy the mind. Mind is the emotional center. This is all love, passion, desires, everything is coming at the mental level. And I love her. How do I know I love? It's not an intellectual analysis. It's an emotional commitment, attachment coming. So all the attachments are at the emotional level. Arjuna crying only because of attachments. We all cry only because of our attachments. Attachments come because now emotional identification with the things. So a mother and a baby may be suffering, and the physical is suffering, and the physical pains are with the baby, but the mental pains are with the mother. She suffers much more looking at the suffering of the baby. Physically she is not suffering, but mentally she is suffering much more than even the baby, thinking about how baby is suffering. Because of identification with the equipment or with the object of analysis. So, the simple example is, so I am after scrumptious lunch, and I am sitting in the air-conditioned room, sitting in the lazy boy chair and watching a movie there, because I have nothing else to do. So when I was watching the movie, I saw the very serious movie. All Indian movies are very serious, and there the hero and heroine are running in the forest, chased by the villains, and there they are suffering, and I am here sitting there watching and crying. They are the ones who is suffering. I am sitting in the air-conditioned room. They are in the hot sun in the forest. But I am sitting in air conditioning and in a lazy boy chair and relaxing there, but at the same time I am crying because my identification with the characters, it is so intense that I became those characters and I am suffering the consequence of those. That's called emotional attachments, and that's what is the suffering also. All our suffering comes because of the emotional attachments. Intellect knows what is right and what is wrong, but because of the attachments, intellect is overpowered. That's why we analyze, because of the values, the divergence between the mind and intellect is called the sin. So in the emotional center is part of the mind, and also mind is also called samshayatmakam. This is manas sankalpa vikalpanadibihi. That's how he is defined in the sloka 95 of the Viveka Chudamani. It is sankalpam become, should I do it, should I not do it, to be or not to be, the famous, the Shakespearean quotation, all that is in the mind only. All that is say, we turn the furnace off, everything off, and the stove is off, and then going suddenly the mind comes, hey, did I turn the stove off or not? So we had to run back again, check whether everything is okay or not, we have locked the door or not. All this samsayatmikam is doubts come because of the mind. There's an intellectual doubts, but this is an emotional doubts. Intellectual doubts is, if I don't know, I need to know. So there, because of the analysis and not having a consistent teaching or consistent understanding, the intellect may question. That is an objective questioning. But here we talk about emotional sankalpam vikalpam, to do or not to do. Many people cannot make a decision only because of that. The wavering mind is the emotional mind. They have no intellectual determination. Once the intellect is determined, yes, I want to do. Okay, everybody makes on the January 1st, from now on I'm going to do exercise and all that, and after 2 days that is gone. Why? The determination of the intellect has to be supported again, backed up by the emotional commitment also. And that emotional commitment is not there, intellect has become weak, therefore people lose a willpower because they have misused intellect against the intellect by using the mind, supporting the mind. Emotional attachments are overpowering the intellectual judgment, and therefore the will to act is also lost. Therefore the buddhi and the mind are in the order, so whatever the buddhi says, mind has to follow. And that's part of arjavam that Krishna also says in this amanitmadam vittam sakshanti arjavam. Arjavam is straightforwardness. What I decide and what I feel has to be in line. Then only I can do. Suppose I cannot do it, what should I do? My mind is not capable of doing by intellectually judgment, but I'm not able to follow, but I want to follow. What should I do? Take the help of the Lord. So when the mind, emotional center surrenders to the Lord, then Lord will take over. And this is what the Bhagavad Gita is picturized, where the Krishna is sitting there with the reins in the hand and Arjuna is standing there, and this is what in the Kathopanishad the same analogy is being used, where intellect is in the driving and the mind and the ego is sitting back. All that has to be understood. The 5 horses are 5 sense organs, and the mind sometimes is used as the controlling power, and the intellect has to be deciding. Then one can reach the destination. Otherwise, we will not be able to control the road that you are traveling is essentially the path that you want to go. The sense objects are there. You have to avoid the sense object and take the straight path all the way to the truth. And that's what is the picturization of Bhagavad Gita itself. And this in fact is discussed in the Kathopanishad by the Yamadharma Raja in discussing with the Nachiketas. So we have buddhi and we have the mind. And below the mind there is ahankara. Ahankara means is essentially ownership of it. I am this. and I did this. So actions are done by the intellect and by the transactional, the karmendriyas and jnanendriyas, and these are all part of the prakriti only. But there is a notion that comes, idea that comes in the mind, that's a part of the thought, and that is called ahankara. Ahankara is identification with this, is called ahankara. So whole ahankara, ego is nothing but I am this, is the ego. So all our biodata is I am all this that I can quantify and qualify, everything in this form. I am this, that, my educational qualifications. So all the qualifications belong to the objects, and that I claim as I am. So I am equal to this is ahankara. That is the ego. In the very equation itself there is a problem, because I am the subject and this is an object, and subject object are identified as one. When I say I am ego, I am this, I am that, and people ego are very big, claiming what all this is mine, therefore I am all that also. So along with the ahankara, mamakara comes into picture. I am this and that is mine. So that which I am not, and I want to make that also as mine by possessing it, and I claim this is mine. So aggrandizing selfishness comes into picture, because I want to become big. Why? Because my nature is infinite, so I want to become infinite by bloating myself, by gaining this, gaining that, as this mine, and when I try to gain by the process, I will never reach it, because the more I gain, more I want it also, and there is almost infinite in any field, and therefore I will never accomplish that way. That's why Vedanta says you are trying to solve a problem in a wrong way, and recognize that there is no really problem to solve, and therefore very solving a problem has become a problem itself, and that has to be understood. Therefore ahankara involves I am this, ownership involved. It's a false ownership where this doesn't belong to me, because it becomes of the prakriti. I am pure conscious entity and this is inert entity, and that has to be understood also. So that's called ahankara, that's called the ego. But along with the ahankara there is a mamakara comes. Mamakara means this is mine. So I-ness is ahankara, minus, M-Y-N-E-S-S, minus is the mamakara. This ahankara and mamakara are the two essential things that is driving us all the time, and therefore we have to understand and say I am not this. Has to be, because I can objectify this, and therefore I am able to put it in a paper. I am this. So this is an object and I am a subject. I cannot be equal to the object. That is part of why I am not this has to be understood. So this is being anatma being discussed. This is a part of anatma only, not atma. So there is atma different from anatma. But atma, anatma are not separate as two physical entities. In every anatma there is atma also, because atma is infinite and it cannot be away from anything. So everything has to be inside only. So therefore I had to use a very subtle discrimination to separate this I am this in that. I had to use I am this. I had to use the very ego in analysis also. It's not going about beyond the ego. I had to use the very ego in order to understand what is ego and how do I cross this ego, and that also I had to understand, so that I had to separate in a cognitively, but is by using intellect only. I had to separate that which is inseparable and that which can be quantified as not being, that which is left without quantification. When I remove this I am, this is together. When I remove this part, what is left is I am, that is self-shining and self-revealing Atma. So I had to use I am this only and use the very ego in order to analyze it, and in the very analysis I had to use a very subtle discrimination. That's why it is very subtle. That's why all other qualifications have been described exhaustively in this analysis. Therefore one has to be very careful in terms of how the existent and non-analysis are not. It's coming or not? It's okay? Anjali, yeah? Oh. So one has to be careful in terms of this I am this, where together is always there, where the consciousness and the unconscious entities are together, and therefore I need a discrimination, and that is called ahankara. And the fourth aspect of the antakarana is called chittam. Chittam is essentially the memory. So whatever I know, I store back into my memory, and I can recollect back whenever I need, depending upon the capacity of my mind. So when I see an object, I see attributes of the object, and when I see the attributes of the object, I go back. That's called cognition, and volition and cognition occurs. When I cognize an object, it goes back into the memory and says, is there an object with these attributes? So therefore there is a recognition, that means looking at the past, whatever the memory is, and that which is same as this attributes that I am seeing. Therefore I say, hey, this is a cow, these are horse, because in the previously I already know the attributes of the object which is stored as a cow. So interestingly, there is a analysis. It says there are two parts of the brain where the pictures are stored one side and the language is stored in the other side of the brain. The memory involves bringing the picture and the associated name together. So when I say cow, immediately I have a picture of the cow as well as the name coming from that. But if the two things are not synchronized, sometimes I see a person, I remember a person, I know this man, but I forget the name. The name has to come somewhere else. So these are part of the aging process that occurs because of the storing of information, chittam. So this is also part of the software is loaded, your programs are loaded. It's like that. Same way, a subtle information is stored in the memory itself. So all this antakarana is required because of the human being, because I have the capacity to remember, because of the chittam, the knowledge can take place, because I don't have to relearn or reinvent a wheel every time, because I already learned that one, I can use that memory and then learn the new things also with that. So this is a part of the evolution. That's why Durlabham, this the birth as a human being itself is this capacity called conceptual thought is possible for a human being, even according to the Aldous Huxley, in terms of evolution of a human being. Why human being is the highest in the evolutionary process? Because he can think, and therefore, not that I think therefore I am, because I am there and I can have a capacity to think, and depending upon the how I have trained the intellect and the mind together. So in these four aspects of antakarana is important. Now the subject I am is different from this antakarana also. So in the mind, when I say mind includes the whole package itself. The mind has a capacity to learn, and also mind is a capacity to see. So how does the seeing occurs? The information from the five senses that we have, the sabda, sparsa, rupa, rasa, gandha, sabda, sounds, and sparsa, touch, etc., the five senses, gather the information of the object, feed into the mind. So this is what the process of learning is. So mind has to be there, and it integrates the information from the five senses. I am seeing and I am hearing and I am tasting. All the five sense input are brought in, and that forms a vritti in the thought in the mind, and the mind itself splits as though a subject and the object. But mind itself is inert according to this analysis that we are doing. It is part of anatma. So there must be some other atma. So Dhamma is a knower. Who is a knower? That's exactly is being by discarding all this. But here the mind has gained a capacity to know because of something backing behind it. That has to be understood. And that's what is called reflected consciousness. So who is the knower and all that, we'll go into a lot more details later, but just for the time being, since we understand the pure consciousness is all pervading, and the pure consciousness enlivens the mind by reflecting itself, and the mind becomes active, and mind becomes sensible or conscious entity, and itself gains, just like the moon has become a luminous entity. Moon and the mind are related, by the way, because the moon is the presiding deity of the mind. So moon has become a luminous entity, not because of itself, because of the reflection of the sunlight. Same way, the mind has become a conscious entity because of the reflection of the consciousness, because it has a capacity to reflect, and the all-pervading consciousness is as though getting reflected in the local mind, depending upon the local mind capacity to reflect. So depending on the mirror, the reflection. So it says in the Atma Bodha, it says, Sada sarvagatotpyatma na sarvatrava bhasate. Even though it is all infinite, it doesn't express itself everywhere. It expresses most efficiently in the buddhi. Sada sarvagatotpyatma na sarvatrava bhasate. Buddha veva bhaseta swacheshu pratibhimbavatu. So if the buddhi is all polished, then the reflection occurs beautifully, everything gets reflected. If the mirror is not clean or dirty or covering, then the reflection is also get covered. So it's nothing to do with the pure light, it is something to do with the reflecting medium. Therefore we have to polish the medium. Therefore brainwashing is required. Washing the brain is preparing the mind by purification process. All that is implied in this. Then in the next analysis we go further about the subtle body. With this we'll stop here. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.